In a small martial arts gym, where the scent of sweat and determination hung heavy in the air, a story unfolded that would leave everyone who witnessed it forever changed. The gym, Elite Martial Arts, was a place where dreams were forged through discipline and grit, where students honed their skills under the fluorescent glow of overhead lights. But on this particular Thursday evening, the atmosphere was charged with something far more intense than a typical training session. It was a moment where pride clashed with humility, where past wounds resurfaced, and where one man's quiet strength would reshape the hearts of everyone around him. The story began with Daniel Mitchell, a black belt instructor whose arrogance filled the room as effortlessly as his booming voice. He stood at the center of the tatami, his presence commanding, his black belt gleaming like a badge of superiority. Daniel was a man accustomed to being revered, his skills unquestioned, his authority absolute. But that night, his attention wasn't on his students or their training. Instead, it fixed on a figure often overlooked, a man who moved silently through the gym with a mop in hand. Brandon Lewis, the janitor. Brandon, at 42, was a quiet man with a calm demeanor, his face etched with the lines of a life lived through hardship. For 3 weeks, he'd been cleaning the gym, arriving after hours when the students had long gone home. But this evening, the advanced class had lingered, and Daniel's eyes caught Brandon as he worked. What started as a jest, a careless challenge thrown out to amuse the students, quickly spiraled into something far more serious. Daniel's words, laced with mockery, cut through the gym, taunting Brandon to step onto the mat, to prove himself in a place where he was seen as nothing more than the man who cleaned the floors. Brandon, however, was no ordinary janitor. Beneath his unassuming exterior lay a past he had buried for 2 decades, a past filled with glory and pain. 20 years ago, he was known as the Silent Storm, a name that echoed through MMA arenas worldwide. In his early 20s, Brandon had been a legend, undefeated, a 5-time world champion whose speed, power, and unshakable composure left opponents in awe. His nickname came not from bravado but from his eerie silence in the ring, a calm that masked the ferocity of his strikes. He had it all: fame, fortune, respect, until one tragic moment changed everything. That moment came during a training session in Las Vegas, as Brandon prepared for what would have been his 6th world title bout. He trained alongside his best friend Tony, a man who had been like a brother, raised with him in the tough streets of Chicago. Together, they had escaped poverty, their bond forged through shared struggles and triumphs. But that day, the weight of past taunts, cruel words aimed at Brandon's identity, had simmered in his heart, fueling a rage he couldn't control. In a sparring session meant to be light, Brandon's emotions took over. A single, devastating punch landed harder than intended, and Tony fell, motionless, to the mat. The sound of that impact, the sight of his friend lying still, haunted Brandon for years. Tony didn't survive, and though the official report called it a tragic accident, Brandon carried the guilt like a permanent wound. He walked away from fighting, from fame, from everything, choosing a life of anonymity to escape the pain. Now, in the gym, Daniel's taunts unknowingly struck at that very wound. His words, dripping with contempt, echoed the jeers Brandon had faced in his fighting days, the same kind that had pushed him to lose control all those years ago. As Daniel mocked him, Brandon gripped his mop tighter, his heart racing with memories he'd fought to suppress. He wanted nothing more than to keep the peace, to protect the quiet life he'd built. But Daniel's relentless provocations chipped away at that resolve. each jab a reminder of the past Brandon had tried so hard to leave behind. The students watched, some uncomfortable, others drawn into the tension. Among them was Emily Chen, a dedicated student who admired Daniel, but felt a growing unease at his cruelty. She saw the quiet strength in Brandon's restraint, the way he refused to rise to the bait, even as Daniel's words grew sharper, more personal. The gym became a stage for a battle not yet fought, a clash between arrogance and humility, between a man who thrived on dominance and another who had learned the cost of losing control. As Daniel pushed further, his voice rising with mockery, Brandon stood at a crossroads. He could walk away, as he had for 20 years, or he could step onto the mat and face the past he'd buried. His heart pounded, torn between the fear of repeating his greatest mistake and the need to defend his dignity. The gym fell silent, every eye on him, waiting for his choice. And in that moment, Brandon knew the challenge he'd avoided for 2 decades had found him again. He set down his mop, squared his shoulders, and met Daniel's gaze with a calm that carried the weight of a storm. The silent storm was about to return, not for glory, but for something far greater. The chance to prove that true strength lies not in fighting others, but in mastering oneself. The air in elite martial arts gym grew thick with anticipation, a stillness so heavy it felt like the world held its breath. Brandon Lewis, the man once known as the Silent Storm, stood at the edge of the tatami, his decision made. For 20 years, he had run from the ring, from the memories of a tragic mistake that cost him his best friend, his career, and his peace. But now, faced with Daniel Mitchell's relentless taunts, he could no longer turn away. This wasn't about proving his strength or reclaiming past glory. It was about defending his dignity, about showing the students watching in silent awe that true power comes from within, not from belittling others. As Brandon stepped onto the mat, a transformation seemed to take hold. The humble janitor, whose presence had always been quiet and unassuming, shed his dark blue jacket to reveal a physique sculpted by years of discipline. Faint scars on his arms told stories of battles fought long ago, each mark a testament to a life far from ordinary. His stance was steady, his eyes calm yet piercing, carrying the weight of a man who had faced the best fighters in the world and walked away undefeated. The students, who moments ago had seen him only as the man with the mop, now sensed something extraordinary. Whispers rippled through the crowd, their curiosity tinged with a growing respect. Daniel, however, was blind to the shift. His arrogance burned brighter than ever, fueled by the belief that he could dominate this so-called janitor with ease. He strutted forward, his black belt a symbol of his authority, his voice dripping with disdain as he mocked Brandon's resolve. To Daniel, this was a game, a chance to assert his superiority in front of his students. But to Brandon, it was a moment of reckoning, a chance to face the demons of his past without losing himself to them. His heart pounded, not with fear of Daniel, but with the fear of what might happen if he let his emotions take control again. The memory of Tony, lying lifeless on a gym floor, loomed large, a warning that kept his movements measured, his mind sharp. The match began with a signal, and Daniel wasted no time. He charged with the ferocity of a man determined to end things quickly, his punches and kicks slicing through the air with raw power. Each strike was meant to humiliate, to prove that Brandon didn't belong. But Brandon moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. His footwork was light, his dodges precise, as if he could read Daniel's intentions before they even formed. Blow after blow missed its mark, Daniel's fists finding nothing but empty air. The students watched, their eyes wide, as the man they'd underestimated revealed a skill that outshone their instructor's bravado. A hush fell over the gym, broken only by the sound of Daniel's frustrated grunts. Emily Chen, standing among the students, felt her heart race. She had always admired Daniel's skill, but now she saw something different in Brandon. A quiet strength, a mastery that went beyond technique. Her curiosity got the better of her, and while the fight unfolded, she slipped her phone from her pocket. Typing quickly, she searched for Brandon Lewis, MMA fighter. The results flooded her screen, and her breath caught as she read about the Silent Storm, the undefeated champion who had dominated the MMA world. Articles and videos painted a picture of a legend, a fighter whose silence in the ring was as intimidating as his strikes. Emily's pulse quickened. The man they all thought was just a janitor was a giant in the world of martial arts, a name spoken with reverence. As she shared her discovery with those around her, the gym buzzed with disbelief. Students exchanged stunned glances, their whispers growing louder. The realization that they were watching a legend in action shifted the atmosphere entirely. Even Daniel sensed the change, his confidence faltering as he noticed the awe in his students' eyes. His attacks grew wilder, more desperate, as if he could reclaim his authority through sheer force. But Brandon remained unflappable, his movements a study in control. He didn't strike back, didn't need to. Every dodge, every step was a lesson in itself, showing the students that true strength wasn't in aggression but in composure. Daniel's frustration boiled over, his face flushed with rage. He hurled insults, each one sharper than the last, but they only seemed to bounce off Brandon's calm exterior. The more Daniel pushed, the more he unraveled, his arrogance laid bare for all to see. Brandon, in contrast, stood as a pillar of restraint, his eyes reflecting a deep sorrow for the man before him. He spoke, his voice steady but firm, urging Daniel to stop, to see that this fight was about more than winning. But Daniel, too consumed by his wounded pride, refused to listen. He lunged again, his strikes fueled by desperation, each one missing as Brandon moved like a shadow, untouchable. The students began to see Daniel differently. Emily, in particular, felt a pang of disappointment. The instructor she had once idolized was revealing a side she couldn't admire, a man driven by ego, not honor. Her eyes turned to Brandon, whose every move spoke of a strength forged through pain and redemption. She shouted encouragement, her voice cutting through the tension, urging Brandon not to falter. Her words snapped him out of a fleeting moment of doubt, a memory of Tony that threatened to pull him under. He took a deep breath, centering himself, reminding himself why he was here. Not to destroy, but to defend, to teach, to heal. In that moment, Brandon made a choice. He would end this fight, not with violence, but with precision and purpose. Daniel, oblivious to the shift, launched a final reckless attack, a spinning kick meant to crush. But Brandon, with the calm of a seasoned warrior, stepped aside, letting the kick sail past. In one fluid motion, he countered with a subtle sweep, catching Daniel off balance. The gym erupted in a collective gasp as Daniel crashed to the mat, his pride shattered as surely as his body hit the floor. The silence that followed was deafening, every student frozen, their eyes locked on the scene before them. Brandon stood over Daniel, not in triumph, but in empathy. He extended a hand, his voice soft but resolute, offering not judgment, but understanding. Daniel, trembling with shame, looked up at the man he had mocked, the man who had just shown him what true strength meant. Slowly, he took Brandon's hand, rising to his feet as the weight of his actions settled over him. The students watched, their hearts stirred by the moment, by the lesson unfolding before them. This was no ordinary fight. It was a clash of values, a testament to the power of humility over arrogance, of respect over contempt. Daniel, his voice shaking, turned to the students and offered an apology, his words raw with sincerity. He admitted his arrogance, his failure to embody the true spirit of martial arts. The gym remained silent, but the air was thick with emotion. The students saw Brandon not just as a victor, but as a teacher, a man who had faced his own darkness and emerged stronger. Emily, her eyes shining with tears, felt a profound respect for the janitor who had turned out to be so much more. And Brandon, looking out at the faces around him, knew he had done more than win a fight. He had honored Tony's memory, not by hiding from the past, but by facing it with courage and grace. The silence in elite martial arts gym was profound, a hush that carried the weight of a moment no one would ever forget. Brandon Lewis, the man once known as the Silent Storm, stood at the center of the mat, his presence radiating a quiet strength that seemed to fill the entire room. The fight with Daniel Mitchell had ended, not with a display of dominance, but with a lesson in humility that touched every heart in the gym. Daniel, still shaken, stood before his students, his apology hanging in the air like a confession, raw and vulnerable. For Brandon, this wasn't about victory in the traditional sense. It was about something far deeper, a chance to reclaim his dignity, to honor the memory of his lost friend Tony, and to show everyone watching what it truly meant to be strong. As Daniel's words faded, Brandon stepped forward, his gaze steady but warm, filled with a compassion that disarmed everyone around him. He spoke to the students, his voice calm yet resonant, carrying the weight of a man who had lived through glory and tragedy. He didn't speak of his past as a champion, nor did he boast of his skills. Instead, he shared a simple truth, that true strength lies not in overpowering others, but in mastering oneself, in treating every person with respect, no matter their role or appearance. The students listened, their eyes wide, their hearts stirred by the wisdom of a man they had once overlooked. Emily Chen, standing among them, felt tears prick her eyes, her admiration for Brandon growing with every word. She saw in him not just a fighter, but a teacher, a guide who had walked through darkness and emerged with a light to share. The atmosphere in the gym shifted, the tension of the fight giving way to a warmth that felt almost sacred. The students, once divided by Daniel's arrogance and their own hesitation, now felt united by a shared understanding. They saw Brandon for who he truly was, not just the janitor who cleaned their floors, but a man who had faced unimaginable loss and chosen to rebuild his life with humility. Emily, still clutching her phone, couldn't help but share what she had discovered about Brandon's past. Her voice, clear and earnest, cut through the quiet as she revealed his identity as the Silent Storm, the undefeated MMA champion whose name had once echoed across arenas worldwide. The gym erupted in murmurs of awe, students exchanging glances of disbelief and respect. The man they had underestimated was a legend, and yet he stood before them, not with pride, but with a quiet grace that made his presence all the more powerful.